Welcome to my channel. I'm Elizabeth Liz Machette, and today my guest is John Foster, and we are talking about unaspected planets and how can they make needs happen. Hi, John. Welcome. How are you today?
I'm good, Liz. How about yourself?
Well, I'm hanging in there. It's been a busy season, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So, John is an astrologer, software developer, teacher, lecturer, graduate of Noel Till's master degree certification, and his website is astroperegrine.com. I'm an astrologer, author, and certified relationship astrologer, and my website is alightpath.com.
Mhm.
So I'm going to let John lead us through unaspected planets. Go ahead, John.
Okay, so I thought we would do a little bit something different. We've had 4 or 5 sessions where we talked about nothing but midpoints, and obviously, it's not that midpoints we couldn't continue to have discussions of them. We could, but there are other things in astrology that do not get enough attention, in my opinion, and one of them is our topic today. So, as always, I show you the cheat sheet. If you hear me say planets or points or anything else, I mean these. Okay, Sun, Moon, through Pluto, the ascendant MC, the node. And if I say the node, that includes the south node because it's all in nodal axes. And then the Aries point, which is at 0 degrees of any of the cardinals. So 0 degrees Aries, Cancer, Libra, or Capricorn.
Thank you.
Okay, so today's topic is unaspected planets. And I prefaced it with how can they make needs happen? And all the planets represent behavioral faculties. And the planets don't cause anything to happen in a person. We often, as astrologers, we talk like the planets are coming down there and doing something to us. And some of that goes back to the old mythological thing. And some of that goes because it's just easier to say it that way rather than always say the planets seem to mirror and correlate with, well, Mercury's in this and this is what's happening. Okay, so all of the planets have our behavioral faculties, and anything that happens in a human being that makes your behavior change, it's something that you need to make happen. We're not going to spend a lot of time in that because that's a whole psychological conversation, but I like to do that. I like to keep that in mind. So let's leave it there and we'll see how it goes as we go through. Okay, so the first thing is if we're talking about unaspected planets, then the first thing we need to figure out is, well, what's an aspect? I know every astrologer knows this, so we'll just go through it real quick. So if you look at aspects, this is sort of how they evolved over time. And an aspect is nothing more than what's the relationship between a pair of planets or more than a pair. In the early tradition, we had aspects by signs. So if you go back and you look at the natural horoscope has Aries on the first house, Aries, and then it has Taurus and Gemini and Cancer and so on. So in the beginning, it was Aries is over here, Libra's on the opposite sign, so those two are opposed, and so on and so forth. That's how they generally would view the aspects. In the first century, Ptolemy came around and he made a big emphasis about the Ptolemaic aspects, which are the conjunction at 0, sextile at 60, square at 90, trine at 120, and opposition at 180. So these are the separating degrees between a pair of planets. And that's pretty much been that until Kepler came along, and he was kind of a smart guy. And then he started to apply some additional geometry to it, and in fact, music, and started to think about notes and trying to correlate and bring the astrological symbols into sort of this beautiful musical notation. And he came up with a bunch of his own aspects, and some of them, that's where we get the semi-sextile, we get the quincunx at 150. And we wound up having, in his case, he wound up coming out with a perfect 12 aspects in order, again, to come up with this kind of beautiful symmetry that he saw. And then later that was followed up with some minor aspects, as we call them, which is the semi-square, which is 45 degrees, quintile at 72, sesquiquadrate at 135. And then later, Noel Till rediscovered an aspect that was originally created by a German author named Thomas Ring. And that aspect was the aspect called the quindecile, and that's 165 degrees. It's kind of, if you think about it, it's a midpoint between the quincunx and the opposition. Okay. And from a natural horoscope, it's right smack in the middle of the sixth house and right smack in the middle of the eighth house. Okay. And yes, I'm not going to go into them. This is a diagram of what we just said. So if you look at that, you see 0 degrees. That's at Aries. You see the opposite. That's 180. That's at Libra, and so on. You can view them at your own discretion when you later review the video. Okay. Um, Now, when it comes to an unaspected planet, we used to call them. So my background, as you know, or if you understand Noel Till, my background comes from what Noel Till taught us. And so in the beginning, he taught us that an unaspected planet was called a peregrine planet. But the problem is that a peregrine planet, from Noel's definition, and the peregrine planet, as it's been used historically all through traditional astrology, are very different. So but what he meant by that is that any planetary pair that does not have any Ptolemaic aspects. And if we remember, the Ptolemaic aspects were conjunction, sextile, square, trine, or opposition. Okay, so you can see here, this is what we mean by it. Now, that does mean then that an unaspected planet can have another minor aspect. It could have a 45-degree aspect. It could have a 135-degree aspect. Okay, it could have a quintile at 72 degrees, but it can't have one of these. And through his research, he discovered that if a planet doesn't have one of these, it makes a very important statement in the chart. Now, I added something over here as well. As you can see the orbs. If it's the sun or moon, we give it a little bit more latitude, so that because the sun and moon can stretch out and kind of pull things out that are that important in the chart. But the other ones, we generally speaking keep pretty tight. Okay, so what this means is that mathematically, if you do this in a computer, you could wind up missing some aspects. For example, let's say you have a sextile and it's 4.5667 degrees away. Well, in the computer, it's not going to show you a sextile. So you still kind of need to view these by eyeball. And when you view them by eyeball, just look at this particular degree sequence. Okay. All right. Now, like I said, planets correlate with the inherent behavioral need drives. So, for example, my moon is in Capricorn. Now, people have various definitions, but the definition I like to think about is my moon needs to make things happen. And so and my moon is in my sixth house. So would it surprise you to know that I need to be always busy doing something productive at pretty much at all times, unless I'm sleeping? And even when I'm sleeping, I need to be thinking about what I need to be doing. Okay. And the needs are seen primarily with the sun through Pluto. So we would not consider asteroids. We would not consider the ascendant or the MC as a need behavior. We would not see the nodes. The aspects between planetary pairs, what do they show? They show contact. They show how they interact with one another, how they communicate with one another, how they connect. Now, this connection can be easy and supportive, and both planets can be working together. For example, a sextile or a trine. Or they can be stressful and challenging, meaning that the planets are working at cross purposes. So this planet wants to get its needs accomplished. This planet wants to get its needs accomplished, but they're not working together. Okay. And so there you have possibly your conjunction, but for sure your square in opposition. Or they can be unaspected. Now, if they're unaspected, then how can they connect with each other? Okay, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. And so I'm giving you some examples of people who have unaspected planets. Now, how do you see an unaspected planet? Well, the easiest way is to look at your aspect grid. And if you go into your aspect grid and you go down the planetary lane, okay, so for example, if you look at the sun at the top and you go vertically down, and you go down each of those little cells as they're touching a planetary pair. So Sun, Moon, nothing's there. Sun, Mercury, nothing there. Okay, Sun, Venus, Sun. But look at Sun, Jupiter, we have a square. And then Sun, Saturn, we have a conjunction. Okay, so we already see that we have either a conjunction or a square or a trine or a sextile or an opposition. So we know the sun is. And we do that for each of the planets. We just simply go across, and then we would go to the moon, and well, right away we see the moon is sextile Mercury. So, okay, that's aspected. Now, when we go to Venus, do we see any conjunctions down the Venus lane? And I highlighted them in yellow because that's what I do. I go onto I print out my chart document with my aspect grid on it, and then I take a yellow highlighter and I go across any of them that don't have any planets in them. And often I also put a green line as well. But if you go across from Venus to Sun, Moon, and Mercury, nothing. All you see there is there's like a inconjunct. Uh, Actually, the 30-degree inconjunct, I think it is. And then if you go down, you don't see anything with Mars or Jupiter. You go down, you see with Uranus, it has a sesqui quadrate. That's 135 degrees, but it's not one of the big aspects. Okay, so that's why these are colored yellow, even though you see. Now, notice Venus does conjunct the node, but the node is not considered to be one of the planets that you take into consideration. Okay, and it's the same thing for Mars. Now, on my chart, I consider my Mars to be an aspect. So even though I wrote this, I would not be looking at my Mars because it's actually in a bunch of things. And I just can feel that it's involved. And plus, I know me. So I know how my Mars is acting inside of me. Okay, so in this case, we have Venus and Mars. So that's how you mark them off. And you see, I draw a line. And also, like I said, remember, orbs are empirical guidelines, not chiseled in stone. There's no aspect grid in your brain. Okay, this is something we use to guide us. And that's how we do it. Okay, next page. Okay, so what does it mean, behavioral tendencies, when you have an unaspected planet? Well, the planet seems to run wild in the chart. Okay, well, if it has any connections and the planets are always trying to get their needs accomplished, but I have nobody that I can work with in here to help me, then I still want my needs accomplished. So I'm going to take over this chart somehow. Okay, so oftentimes you have a planet with unhindered expression because since it doesn't have anything influencing it, it gets to operate on its own and by itself. And often what happens then is it becomes extremely emphasized. It can be exaggerated. It can become imbalanced. And then by virtue of the fact that it's not connected, it can become further disconnected because it's off. I mean, it's kind of like if you're in a ballroom and all the dancers are paired up and you've got this one dancer by himself dancing through the floor. Okay, kind of think of it that way. Or if you see a wild Mustang out in the desert area and is running wild, it's kind of like that. That's the image I like to have in my brain, by the way. Noel says it this way: it often results in skills and talents and or overcompensatory behavior. Okay, because again, your planets represent your needs. Your needs are what's happening in your psyche. Your brain is trying to balance everything out to help you become the balanced person you need to be. Well, when you have an unaspected planet, it's imbalance. So what is it doing to try to bring it in? Often it overcompensates in the very area that we're looking at. You'll see that when we go through. What you also need to do is the planet may be unaspected, the planet may be in a particular house, but that planet also rules houses. So you want to make sure that you anticipate the behavior through the house tenant, where it is, and the houses that it rules. For example, if it's Mercury or Venus, they rule two houses. Okay. And I'm a modern astrologer, so they're the only two that rule two houses. Okay, and then you also follow the dispositor chain for clues. Dispositor chain, all that means is that my moon, for example, is in Capricorn, therefore my dispositor is Saturn. My Saturn is in Scorpio, so my dispositor, modern day, is Pluto. Okay, if it was traditional, my dispositor would be Mars. Okay, and so on. My Pluto is in Leo, disposed of by my sun. Now I'm back into the sort of a circuit going back and forth because they rule each other. Okay, next. Here's an example of how I would mark it. So we saw how I mark the aspect grid. On the actual chart, what I do is I will draw a green oval around the unaspected planet. So immediately my eyes know what I need to look at. And I also will then mark the houses that that planet rules, because those houses are now going to try to figure out how does this behavior work out in terms of those houses. In this case, it's a fourth house, so something to do with the early childhood, something to do with the family home, something to do maybe with ancestry, those kind of things. It also rules the 11th house, so it has some lovability issues that are also involved. Fifth, 11th. And so this I like to say that this Venus originally looked for love in all the wrong places. Okay. Because it's fifth house and 11th house. All right, so let's look at a few examples and we can see. Now I'm going to read off some of my notes when I get to the chart. So bear with me there. I'll try to make this interesting. So the first thing is, if you have an unaspected sun, this is a big deal, because remember, the sun and the moon are the core of who you are. Okay. Your entire chart, in the same way that the solar system is bathed with the sun from the center of it all the way out. And the only reason we can see anything is because of that sun. And the only reason that there's any life is because of that sun. Well, in your chart, that's the same thing with your sun. Your sun, in whatever sign it in, is sending out that particular kind of sun rays in that particular sign. Okay. Kind of think like a camera, and you put a lens on it, and you put a filter, and you put red. Now all of a sudden all your pictures are coming out red. You put a blue filter, all of a sudden it has a blue tint. Okay, well, the sun tints your solar system, your chart, with whatever sign it was in at the time you were born. So if you have an unaspected sun, then you have uncensored, pure expression, because now there's nothing there working with the sun. So the sun's just going to send out its light. So you have uncensored expression, drive, and purpose. What could that lead to? Well, one thing that it could lead to is excessive ego, because there's nothing there. For example, I have Saturn on my sun. Do you think I have excessive ego, or did I have to learn how to have an ego to start with? Okay. So if I did not have Saturn there, yes, maybe I could have had some excessive ego. But that's an overcompensation that can happen. It's the ability to express oneself with authority and integrity. Okay, sometimes what happens there is that it's operating at its own pure sense. So the sun is the authority, integrity in your chart. If you are living your sun, you are living a life that's authentic. If you're not living your sun, you are not living an authoritative life that's with integrity. You're actually working against that. Okay. Another thing that kind of a key thing is, people who have an unaspect sun tend to listen to their own drumbeat. Okay. They don't listen to the noise that's over here, because they don't have any noise interacting with them. So all the noise is inside of their own head. Okay. And they own their life on their own terms. Okay. So maybe the influences that others will have, they may not be having or experiencing them. They might be a trailblazer. They might be one who needs to break away from the pack. They might need to be a person who is on their own and is definitely doesn't want to integrate. Okay. So some of the questions that you can think about is, where does this sun want to shine? By sign and by house rulership. Okay. And again, key thing, are they fitting in, and do they even care? Okay. Now, here's an example of somebody who has an unaspected sun. And this person is an American actress, activist, and a former fashion model. Now, notice that her sun is up here in the 10th house, rushing into the 11th. It's within 5 degrees, 3 to 5 degrees of a cusp we kind of see it as already operating as though it's in that house. It's like leaving a room and you've already stretched your feet and legs into the next room. Okay, that's what it's kind of like. Oh, and by the way, I'm not going to go everything that I put on this screen because there's too much and we would be here for 2 or 3 hours. So, but what we can see here is that I put an oval around the sun. It's unaspected. The sun, if we look at that little check mark down there, it rules the fifth house. Okay. So right away, we're thinking that this sun is going to be involved with fifth house issues. So you could be thinking children, you could be thinking performance, you could be thinking creativity, you could be thinking maybe they're a risk taker, a speculator, maybe they're involved in sports or something along this line. So you're starting to think right away that something is running away with this chart that has to do with the fifth house. Okay, that's what you want to focus in on. All the rest of it is noise. Now, she's known for her extensive work as a UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador, which includes humanitarian activities in Darfur, in Chad, and in Central Africa. In 2008, she was named one of the most influential people in the world. Um, she got her fame really from a movie called Rosemary's Baby. I don't know if you remember that, but interesting that she got her fame from Rosemary's Baby, fifth house. Okay. She dedicated significant periods to raising her adopted and biological children. She had 14.
Wow.
Okay. So this is an example of over compensatory sun, fifth house rulership, focusing in on this need. And the sun is rushing into the 11th. So this is a need to be loved. So what better way than to experience love than to pour out your love? Fifth house, you give love to children. Okay, see that? See how that flows? Now,
Great
all of
example.
the other stuff about this chart, we're not going to go into it. You know who it is. It's Mia Farrow. Okay. And she's also had some challenges that have resulted as a result of those children because she had that public situation with Woody Allen where she proclaimed allegations of sexual assault on their 7-year-old daughter, who later wound up marrying Woody Allen. Okay. So again, everything is intermixed with children. Okay. I think I used to, when I saw this chart and I followed it through, I thought this is a person who needs to mother the world because her sun is in Aquarius. And also interesting, the sign that it's in is opposite the sign that traditionally rules the fifth house, which is Leo. Okay. So I don't know if you have any questions, Liz, or anything. Do you want to elaborate or ask?
Oh, I just thought it was a fabulous example. That's great. Thanks for sharing that. And our audience, if you have any questions, just type them in.
And by the way, all of this other stuff, we could go into that because those are vocational profiles. But I don't have time to do that today.
Okay, and moving along.
Okay, so that's the unaspected sun. When you have an unaspected moon, it kind of also can work in a similar sort of thing. It's also kind of a do your own thing moon. Okay, now remember the moon, sun moon blend, that's the core. Okay, everything builds up around that. Everything in your chart, every planet in your chart is trying to make sure that your sun moon blend is getting accomplished. Okay, now again, when they're not integrated, doesn't make it easy. So here's an unaspected moon. So this suggests a sense of emotional disconnection. Okay, before we had sort of maybe not getting our purpose right, right? This one, it's the emotions because the moon has to do with how we feel about things. It has to do with our habits, our day-to-day. Anything that we do on a day-to-day basis that helps us to feel emotionally secure, that's our moon. Okay, so here we have an emotional disconnection. Since we have an emotional disconnection, we can also have, it can result in an internal imbalance. Okay. It can have one feeling being on the outside looking in, feelings of possible alienation from not only others, but also from yourself. Okay. Because you're never quite understanding what is going on in there. So The question always is, how does the moon shape and use the sun's energy by sign and house rulership? As I think we mentioned a long while ago. Remember, in the old days, the moon used to be called the personality form. And the reason for that is because the sunlight just kind of goes out there, but the moon grabs this light, brings it into container, and forms it. And that's where that personality form idea came from. Um, Now, this moon, because of the disconnection and the imbalance, perhaps it's too lunar. Maybe because it's allowed to be a moon, maybe it's operating too moon, and
Mhm.
maybe it becomes too motherly. Maybe it becomes extremely because of the emotions that are involved here and not having a good sense of what's happening in there. Maybe this person becomes overly sensitive, maybe overly emotional, maybe overly critical about emotional things. Maybe they look across and they see this person having a good cry and they sit there and they criticize them because the very thing they'd like to be able to do, they can't do. Okay, so through projection. And as a result of this, they might easily feel insecure and threatened. Okay. So I have an interesting chart that probably most people are not aware of who this person is. But looking at the chart, we can see that we have the sun, the moon, and Mercury are all unaspected. Okay, so take everything we learned about about the sun being unaspected. Now add what we learned about the moon. And then the next one, which we'll go into later, we'll be talking about Mercury. But we have the three biggies. We have the core of this person being on the outside in, so to speak. Okay. Now, this can happen in many ways. This is an interesting chart. So, this is an American writer, a journalist, and a podcast host for Tablet Magazine, and former director of the Jewish outreach for the Michael Bloomberg presidential campaign, which was in 2020. She's an Emmy nominated producer for Mike Wallace at 60 Minutes. So, of course, Mike Wallace is gone, retired. And before that, she produced for Bill Moyers at PBS. Okay, so she's got quite a pedigree. The role that has defined her most profoundly is identical twin. Ah, sorry about that. Got noise in the background. So, what does it mean to have a mirror image? Because she's an identical twin. Ah, sorry, can you hear that? I apologize for that. Um, how can you be unique when somebody shares your DNA? And these kind of questions percolated through her brain, and she didn't quite feel that she fit in, that she actually wrote a book about it. Okay. And then she also wrote a book about her Jewish year called The 18 Holidays. And she wrote another one called One Wandering Jew, which was a finalist for the 2018 National Jewish Book Award. Stars of David. Anyway, she has all of this kind of stuff. And it's hard to be a Jewish person in the modern world. You already are constantly concerned that you're not quite fitting in. And some people actually go out of their way to make you feel that way, sadly. So this is not an easy position to be in, but this is an interesting chart. And by the way, the charts that I used over here, you can Google them and find these people under Wikipedia, and you can get a lot of information about these charts where you can understand more about the dynamics that are going on in their life experience. Okay. But this is a good chart to analyze and keep a watch on and see for somebody how are they managing with three planets that are not dancing. They're all dancing by themselves inside of the music thing, the music hall. So what else did I want to say about her? Anyways, I found her to be a fascinating example. Okay, let's go and look at Mercury. And then, so when you look at that chart later, go back and review the sun, the moon, and unaspected Mercury. And probably the way that she works everything out is through the unaspected Mercury, because everything I told you had to do with communications, didn't it?
Yes.
Okay. So, so she's another example on top of the one I'm going to show you to look for the unaspected Mercury. So basically, if it's unaspected Mercury, all Mercury needs to do is it wants to know how to communicate. In all the various things that you can think about that have communication to them, that's Mercury. Okay. Learning is Mercury. Belief systems at a certain level are Mercury combined with Jupiter. Okay. It needs intellectual stimulation, and an unaspected Mercury is not fitting in. So it might be thinking that never turns off. Okay. Heck, even some people who do not have an unaspected Mercury have thinking that never turns off. I have a good example of that. They can be too wired in the nervous system. Okay, so going to be this nervous anxiety that is there. Um, they could be someone who talks constantly. No, it's not me, Liz. Okay, they could overanalyze. They could over scrutinize. They could be highly critical. They can also be brilliant. Okay, or they could be the opposite. They could be someone who has never trained their Mercury, and so therefore they're always saying something negative, communicating negativity, and therefore their communication can become divisive and alienating. Okay, so we don't know how any of this is going to go. That's what the consultation is about. In a consultation, we delve in and we find out when this was all triggered, what happened back there. Is it a pattern that's continuing on in the life experience? And we'll learn that through there. Otherwise, yeah, we're all guessing at what it might be. Okay, so here's a chart of this is an American singer and songwriter, and you notice from this chart that he has Mercury in Pisces. Okay, so this is a person who is going to be extremely sensitive in their thinking. They're going to be possibly aesthetically inclined in their thinking. They're going to have all of those things that Neptune brings to the table because Neptune rules Pisces. Okay. And it's interesting that it also rules the ninth house. It's in the third. So we get this idea about communication and publishing potential going on over here. Okay. Now, it also could be at different levels. I'm not going to say that right now, but we know that in this case, it's an American singer and songwriter. So Mercury becomes communicating through song. Okay. He became known for a series of pop rock ballads recorded after he made this change to his style in the 80s. His achievements include selling more than 75 million records. Okay, pretty good. He recorded 8 top 10 albums and 2 #1 singles on the Billboard charts. He won American Music Awards. He had 2 Grammys. He also, in another capacity, serves as the honorary chairman of Prevent Child Abuse America. And he was the national chairman for This Close for Cancer Research and also some other things that had to do with children. And you can see those dynamics in the chart, but I'm not going to call them. I think if you know who he is, and his name is Michael Bolton, his probably most famous song is his soulful rendition of When a Man Loves a Woman. And if you remember that song. So this is an example of someone who overcompensated with his Mercury by becoming super famous. Okay. And most people don't realize this. Most people that are famous are doing it as a result of overcompensating for something that happened way back. They didn't just decide that they wanted to be famous just to be famous. Something happened that made them feel, usually an insecurity about themselves, that they decided, I'm going to be bigger than all of y'all. And I'm going to sing. What do you mean I can't sing? I'm going to show you. And this developed into an almost obsessive push and drive in order to get this accomplished. But it almost always is born out of an overcompensation. Okay. And overcompensation is not a bad thing. It's just a thing. Okay. So that's Mercury. Now think about the other person that we talked about we used her for the moon. And now think about all of the books and writings and the film and everything that she was in. And you've got 2 good examples of Mercury running away with the chart. All right. Unaspected Venus. Who doesn't like Venus? Who cares if it's unaspected or not? Venus is always nice, right? So this person may be charming to an extreme. They can be quite flirtatious, especially if Venus is in a fire sign. Okay. And the reason they're flirtatious is because it's an attempt to validate a need to feel attractive and be liked. Your question would be why? What happened back there? Again, always goes back to the early childhood stuff that we all grew up on. Sometimes a little bit later in life, maybe there could be a shift somewhere during the midlife or something. But most things, most reason people do what they do and think the way they think and act the way they act is because of how they train themselves starting way back. So this unaspected Venus probably got stimulated somewhere back there. And so you need to find out why. Perhaps it hides away from interaction because Venus is the need to interact and socialize. But if you have an unaspected Venus, and let's say the Venus is wounded, then you may not want to socialize. You can actually have an unaspected Venus and become a hermit. Okay, it could go that way as well. If you're lacking in self-confidence and so hiding away from interaction because you could be lacking in self-confidence and you could be a bit timid. It could be the inability to love yourself. And if you don't have the ability to love yourself, it's going to make it really challenging to love others. Okay. Or you could give yourself away to others as your form of loving, but then you lose yourself. Okay. So the question then again becomes why? What are the early childhood dynamics that cause this to happen? You could be reaching out and attracting the wrong people. Okay. You often hear about mostly with women, but women going after the bad boy. Okay. This could be an example of that, where every single person that they ever wound up being attracted to wound up hurting them in some way and wound up being a dysfunctional influence. But they know it's wrong, but they do it anyways. Okay. It could be confrontational because, again, it has to do with the socializing needs. So just think social, aesthetic, or relational needs running away with the life. Okay. Now, here's a good example. Here we have a person who has a Venus that is unaspected. So if you look at the grid, and we also see that Uranus is unaspected, but they're very close together. So they may in fact be pulling together and see themselves as a conjunction. And then in this case, what you would have, you have an what's the word I'm looking for? You have an island sort of aspect because those two are operating together, but they're going about the chart. They're operating as though they're unaspected, even though they're both together. Okay. So this person needs to socialize, needs to have their opinions respected. It's in Sagittarius by God. Okay. This person needs to have their own voice and they need to have their voice running away with this chart. And they need to do it in such a way that they get to be their own quirky self. They need to individuate. They need to be seen idiosyncratically as themselves. Okay. Why? Because something happened back there that said, you know what? You can't be yourself. And in this case, if you go back and study this person, the parents are born again Christians and her father was a Pentecostal pastor. Okay. Now, no judgment, but they have a certain way. I'm a born again Christian. A born again Christian has a certain way of seeing the world. And that seeing the world may suggest that certain people not be as quirky as they want to be, not be as odd as they want to be. Maybe they got told that, yeah, you can have a voice, but if you want to sing, you need to sing in the church choir. Okay. But don't be singing that Elvis Presley music or any of that stuff over here. No, no, no. That's the devil's music. Okay. So you get this kind of an influence that way. This person is an American singer, songwriter, and television judge. Okay. Now, again, the other thing I want you to see is that this chart rules the seventh house, or Venus rules the seventh house and the 12th house, and also the Uranus rules the fourth. So again, it brings up the idea that the early dynamics had something to do with this person and their overcompensation. And this overcompensation, in order to work its way out, needs to be worked out through a public partnership out there with the public somehow. Okay, because of the seventh house angle in it. This person has 9 at the time that I wrote this. U.S. Billboard Hot 100 number singles. and they received various awards, including 4 Guinness World Records for 5 Billboard Music Awards, 5 American Music Awards, a Brit Awards, and a Juno Award. Okay, so they did a pretty good job of fighting against their background and going out there and becoming something that their parents probably told them, you're never going to do that. If you do that, we might. And there was some challenges in the beginning, although I think later there was some reconciliation. Anyway, so this is one of the world's best-selling artists, sold over 18 million albums and 125 million singles worldwide. Okay, and not to mention they're also pretty wealthy. In 2016, they're already worth 125 million bucks. So I think they did pretty good for themselves. So again, I'm also showing you that it's not necessarily a bad thing for the planets to run away with a chart. But if you don't pay attention to that, you're going to miss a key part of the chart. That's what this whole lecture is about, is that all I'm trying to do is get you to see that these things are important. And when you're out there looking at either yourself, if you have an unaspected planet, then you need to spend time learning what that means for you in your chart. Or if you're about to have a consultation with someone and you see an unaspected planet, you better be prepared to ask some questions about it. Because if you're not, you're going to miss a key part of who that person is. And they're going to walk away going like, it was okay. But I mean, my God, they miss key parts. Okay. And you don't want to do that. By the way, this is Katy Perry, but you already know that from the picture. This is a fascinating one. So unaspected Mars. Okay, so Mars represents your assertiveness, it's your ability to be assertive, aggressive, courageous. It could be hot-headed, quick-tempered. It also could be someone who has an unbridled drive, because if you have a Mars, your Mars is designed to get what your sun, moon, and Venus want accomplished. Okay, that's Mars's job. Mars' job is to put forth the energy and the drive in order to move toward what internally you have internalized as your sun moon blend and what your values from Venus are suggesting it brings to the table. Okay, so Mars is sitting there going, okay, this is what you want. You want to become a famous singer? Okay, let's go make that happen. I'm going to work overtime. Okay? So my working image is one of a stallion running wild, fast, free, going wherever it wants to go, ignoring obstacles or running through them. Okay, this is a powerful aspect. It can be without restraint, and if it's without restraint, it can be overbearing. Could be the person who is unable to sit still, too many projects, too competitive, courageous to a fault. Okay, could be one of those. Imagine one of those young people who has an unaspected Mars, and might be, you see him in movies all the time when they're doing comedies. You see this person that goes on top of a car, and they're holding it on, laying on there and there without restraint. They're saying, "Okay, pick up the speed. Let's go faster, faster, faster." Okay, that could be like an image of a maybe not so, I don't know, safe way of using an unaspected Mars. Now, if they could be an overachiever, but again, if it's an overachiever and unaspected Mars, then that means it's overcompensating for something. There's some neglect or lack of Martian stuff in the beginning that it represents, and you'll see this by what house it was in and what house it rules. Okay, it'll bring you to it. And if it's unrestrained, what if it's unrestrained and unable to go forward? Because you can also have a Mars that cops out. You know what? The world doesn't understand me. Every time I try something, it fails. You know what? So I'm not going to do anything. And then they just escape. Maybe there's a mild Neptunian connection to there. Maybe there's a midpoint between Mars and Neptune or something, as an example. Then you need to look at how upset, frustrated, and angry would they be. Okay, because you don't want to be that, because it's not good for you. So here's a good example. So first of all, we see Mars is unaspected. You can look at the grid. You see the line. We put the little oval around on the chart. And in this case, Mars rules the second house. Now, if you've known anything about the psychological astrology that is viewed through psychodynamics, if the if a house is ruled by something and it is either unaspected or under challenge, then that means that house is not going to operate easily. So in this house, it's the second house, and the second house represents your self-esteem and how you feel about yourself. Okay, so this person probably had trouble liking themselves. Okay, because this Mars is running away with the chart, and in the beginning, this Mars is not going to be probably supported in the early household. Okay, so that's all we want to say about this chart. There's a lot of stuff there. So this person is a Scottish American actor, singer, writer, filmmaker, and activist who has acted in numerous films, television shows, and plays. Won many accolades and awards for humanitarian outreach and activism. And notice that Mars, well, it's still in Virgo, but eventually it's going to be, for most of his life, it's going to be in the eighth house. So some of the things that I'm saying, by progression, it goes into a house where these are all going to be activated. This person is gay. He's promoted the LGBT rights. He MC and fundraising for the Gay and Lesbian Alliance, and been involved in all kinds of AIDS campaigns and anything to raise awareness and to raise help and support and understanding for people in that situation. But here's what I found most fascinating. I found out about him because I picked up his autobiography, and his autobiography is called "Not My Father's Son." And you read that book, and there's various parts are going to bring you to tears. And this is a story about and this is where the self-esteem issues come in. He grew up for his whole life where his father treated him like crap. He would beat him and beat up on him and so on. And the reason he found out later was because he thought that his father thought that his mother had cheated on him and that he was not actually his son. Okay, so those are the dynamics that he was growing up on. Okay, so in this book, he describes the emotional and physical violence his father inflicted on him in childhood. He found out that his father had believed, like I said, he wasn't his biological son. Later, he and his brother took DNA tests and proved to his father that he actually was their father. Okay. And then after that happened, at some point, they reconciled, and I think they have a good relationship now. But it took all of that to get him there. But through all of those years of growing up, imagine the physical, psychic, mental abuse he had to go through. How would you feel if you were growing up in that environment? It's not going to be easy for you, right? And so that's again what this is showing us over here. And his biography is a good example. And I think they have a lot of information even about him on Wikipedia page, where again you can see these things all working out. There's a lot of other stuff there that we could go through. He's got the Aquarian ascendant, so we already know that he's going to be a humanitarian spirit. His sun is in Aquarius, so we already know that he has tendencies. And this is going to make it even worse because here's a guy who was born in the world in the first house, all about me, but in a universal transpersonal sign, which is I can't just think about me. I got to think about the world. Okay. So this is not easy for him, and he's got lots of other things to show for it. Okay, so that's that. Any questions, Liz?
Not so far.
I know we're covering a lot of information, and I know that because of the speed that we're doing it, it's a bit quick. But again, you get to go back and review the presentation. You can review the slides on the presentation. You can take each of those and print it out, do a screen grab and print it out, and then go back to the Wikipedia page or go back to a biography and then work your way through it. And you'll learn a lot about how this works. And by the way, if you're an astrologer and you don't feel confident enough yet to go out and have a consultation, then do it on famous people where you can go and find their biography, and go and find a biography where there's lots of timed dates. And then you go and study their chart, read the biography, have the chart over here. When they have a measurement at a certain time, look at your solar arcs, look at what major transits were happening at that time, and you can see the life unfold. And then you can see how they're using their measurements. So that's an aside, but please take advantage of that.
Great
Okay.
idea and a good teaching tool.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I use it when I'm for my students as well. Okay, so now look at unaspected Jupiter. Now, Jupiter's an interesting one because here you're talking about opining. You're talking about the belief system that you have running wild. You're wanting the world to see itself the way you do. You want it to believe the way you do. You know why? Because you know better. You know perfectly well how everybody else in the world needs to think. Okay? But it could be a tremendous thrust for learning. It could also be the idea that you never feel like you know enough. Okay. So, therefore, if you don't know enough, and I'm sure I say this somewhere, but this is the idea about the never ending student. Okay. Because you don't know enough. Well, if you don't know enough, you got to keep learning. Okay. And to keep learning, if you don't know enough, and it's not that you don't know enough, it's that you don't feel like you know enough. Why do you not feel like you know enough? Who made you feel that you didn't know enough? Was it one of the parents? Did it happen with one of your peers? Was it in a church? Was it in school? Okay. Something happened somewhere back there that caused this to happen. Now, what if they dropped out of school and they have an unaspected Jupiter? Then you pray that they like to read. Okay. Now, nowadays, you need to be careful because you don't have to read a book. You can go to YouTube and spend all day there. Okay. And learn lots of opinions. Now, if they did drop out of school, did the train get off track during the early years and it never got back on? Did they never go back to school? Okay. And again, if they didn't, if the train got off track, and what that means is that you never went and fulfilled your college years and all that and got yourself a degree. And if you don't have a degree in our society, well, there's only a few things that you can wind up doing in order to prove yourself. So if you don't have the credentials, you could be a very successful salesperson. You could start your own company and be an entrepreneur. Okay. And there's other ways like that that you can do it. But it makes it hard with Jupiter because Jupiter wants to prove. It's got something to prove. Okay. It may have a chip on its shoulder. And that's where that opinion stems from. Okay. It could be a life of optimism because Jupiter represents optimism. It could be a life that you see things as never expanding. It could lead to excesses because you see yourself as so much bigger than you really are. Okay, you see yourself as accomplishing so much more than you do. And you see this in TV shows oftentimes, especially with, you see stories about a father who kept selling the mother and kids on the idea that he was going to be the next biggest this or the next biggest that. And you see him failing over time and time again. What was the famous story about the salesman? What was it called? Death of a Salesman. Wasn't that the same story about this father who eventually, I think he killed himself because he wound up not being able to measure up. So you can have this expansion that leads to too much, and then if you never feel like you measure up, it could actually turn in on you. But it also, like I said, could be a life of rewards, beliefs, recognition. Um, it's someone who's always, generally speaking, aiming for the big picture. So the question always is why. And then if you are aiming for the picture, do you ever get to a point where you feel satisfied? Because if you don't get to a point where you feel satisfied, you could be the billionaire who wants to be a trillionaire. Okay. And that's where the expression that money will never make you happy comes from, because it won't make you happy because money doesn't. It's just a tool. It's an instrument. It's how you feel about yourself that makes you happy. Okay. Now, we got an interesting one here. Um, just right on the generational spot here. So a lot of people will know who he is. A lot of people won't know who he is. But this person has a Jupiter, and you come over here, you can see it doesn't have any aspect except for a quintile between Mercury. So right away, you're thinking, okay, it's going to run away with the chart, but it does have a creative connection with Mercury. Okay, so I'm already thinking there's a communication channel here. It's in the seventh house, so it's a public communication of some form. Okay, so I already got that notched into my brain just by looking at the chart. It does rule the 12th house, and to be quite honest with you, I have no clue what that might mean because the 12th house is sort of always has a kind of a veil over it. It has all these negative connotation, it has all these big institutional connotations, but a lot of people don't live there. And a lot of people do quite well with their 12th house. Okay. And we don't have a way of interrogating him to see what that might have meant. But what we do see is that Jupiter is in Cancer, and therefore the dispositor is the moon, which is also in. And notice another thing here, the moon is in Sagittarius, so the moon rule is disposing of Jupiter, and Jupiter is disposing of the moon. So everything that's going to happen to his life is going to be Jupiter, moon, moon, Jupiter. Okay. And it's all going to be seventh and 12th house related. So that publicness of it and that privateness, maybe it's a sense of that he's so private that he needs an area of privacy that nobody ever gets to see. Maybe that's how his 12th house interaction happens here. Okay, enough said. So this is a child prodigy. He enjoyed a career spanning 4 decades of concerts, recordings, television, motion pictures, and endorsements. Okay. He was something like 3 years old when he started playing the piano. Okay. I mean, literally that early. He was publicly performing, I think, when he was about 5 or 6 or something, maybe earlier. I mean, in childhood, he suffered from a speech impediment. And as a teen, from the taunts of the neighborhood children who mocked him for his effeminate personality, his avoidance of sports, and his fondness for cooking and for playing the piano. Okay. And there's other things in there that we could go into where we could see that. Look at that Venus being final dispositor of the chart and being opposed as MC. He embraced a lifestyle of flamboyant excess, both on and off the stage, and he earned the nickname Mr. Showmanship. Okay. Final dispositor. Where is Venus at? Oh, Venus is over there in Cancer. So it's kind of getting pulled into that Jupiter stuff. It's close enough where it's technically not in aspect, but it is in aspect with Pluto. And Pluto tends to, whatever it touches, to intensify and bring to excess. Okay, so whatever Venus represents, which is the socializing and the clothing and all of that, the excessiveness, you can see it right over here. And for Cancerian Jupiter purposes. This is all about, this man got his security this way. Okay, he got his emotional security through his performance and stuff. Anyways, at the height of his fame, he was the highest paid entertainer in the world. Okay, he once stated, "I don't give concerts, I put on a show." And his shows ended with the public invited on stage so they could touch his clothes, his piano, his jewelry, his hands. There was kisses and handshakes and hugs, and usually got involved. Okay. He needed that kind of contact to feel good about himself. A critic summed it up this way near the end of his life: Mr. Showmanship has another more potent, drawing power to his show, the warm and wonderful way he works his audience. Surprisingly enough, behind all the glitz, glitter, the corny false modesty, and the shy smile, Liberace, which is who it is, exudes a love that is returned to his thousandfold. Okay, again, everything in Cancer, Cancer moon. Okay, I hope you can see that. All right, now obviously Jupiter is everything about expansiveness and positiveness and all of that and expansion. Saturn tends to be towards limitations, towards not seeing things expanded, contraction. And so everybody looks at Saturn as kind of being a bad thing. But actually, without Saturn, you would not know how to make your way through the world. You would not know how you're supposed to be as a child inside of your family structure. You would not know how to operate in a school structure, in a church structure, in a job structure. So when you think of Saturn, don't think of something negative. Think of something positive in terms of Saturn represents necessary discipline, necessary structure. Okay. Again, without Saturn, you would not have a clue on how to fit in and get what you want. So, an unaspected Saturn needs to follow one's inner authority. It needs to develop it. It needs to become it. Okay. Because in many respects, if Saturn is necessary discipline, when it's unaspected, it's unbridled. So it may not necessarily be disciplined. It may not know how to fit into that discipline. So it's the opposite of it. Okay. Or it could overcompensate and become super responsible and disciplined, or it could have difficulty learning how to be responsible and self disciplined. Now, I personally know someone who has an unaspected Saturn, a close person, and it took them until they were in their 40s before they started to figure out how to have some discipline in their life and how to take responsibility for their life. Before then, they always relied upon somebody else. And curiously enough, their Saturn's in the seventh house. So they were, generally speaking, were relying upon a partner. Okay. Now, unaspected Saturn embraces and builds societal structures, or it rails and works against them. Again, see the dichotomy here. It either goes fully in or it goes completely out. It can have a tremendous drive toward achievement, or because it doesn't know how to do the Saturnine things that are required in order to get achievement, it has little drive and little achievement. Okay. It can be the long haul view, which means it takes a long time to get there. It's not, generally speaking, an overnight success. Okay. Now, I got an interesting example, but here's another one where I brought it in because here's a good example of where you have Saturn and you have Mercury that are both unaspected. Okay. So here's another one where you can look at this chart from the standpoint of all the communication excesses and overcompensations, and you'll be able, hopefully, to see the Saturn side of this thing too. So this is an American psychiatrist, author, businessman, and media personality. In fact, he was the one who brought psychiatry to the radio, the very first one. Okay. In 1980, began presenting his own full-time show on talk radio. And like I said, he was the first to do it. He was on a talk station called KABC. He screened telephone calls and gave considerable amount of free psychological counseling to his on-air patients. And some of the ones who are still doing it to this day have him to thank. His signature style was an attempt to isolate an individual's source of emotional problems in a very short amount of time. Okay. Now, if Saturn is in Aries, does Saturn in Aries, would that want to take a long time about doing something, or would it like to get right there? Okay.
Get
So it isn't interesting that his Saturn is in Aries. He's an author of many books, and the books were all on self-help nature. Self-help. Okay. Saturn. They were written to assist the individual with his own examination of life, Saturn. So here's where we don't like Saturn, because Saturn always seems to be the principal that's looking over our shoulder when they're doing our schoolwork. Okay, so this is Saturn is looking over our shoulder when they're doing our life work. Okay, so that's where this all comes. His notable books are on risking, another book called I Love You, another one called Let's Work It Out. He had a really popular book. The book that I really enjoyed and I learned about him was one called Emotional Resilience, and the other one was called The Language of Feelings. Okay, so again, do you see a thread over here, and you see how the Mercury and Saturn now overcompensating in his chart, producing this? He needed to do this in order to feel good about himself. And he had a couple other ones too. In his autobiography, he had an autobiography called The Making of a Psychiatrist. And it was a best-selling book and nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. Now, the sad thing about it is, and there's reasons for that, but notice that the houses that I have ticked off are the second house and the fifth house. So this is a person who did not feel good about himself and had difficulty giving love to others, fifth house. Okay. And all of his stuff that he wrote was all about how to do those very things, even to the point of how to have good relationships. Well, at the end of his life, he wound up getting a divorce and having a bad relationship. and he wound up taking his own life. That's the negative side of all this pressure that he put on himself in order to be perfect. Because that's the other thing. Saturn wants us to be as perfect as we possibly can be. So we have to learn how to be careful about letting that take over our psyche. Okay. So this is a good example and it's a sad example. Okay. But if you don't know about him, his books are awesome. If you want to learn how to accomplish things, definitely consider looking up his book, especially Risking, where he talks about if you're going to try to do something, you're going to have to put yourself out there and do it. Because if you don't, you're not going to accomplish anything. Okay. What else did I want to say? Okay. Yeah, that's it. Good example. Okay. I don't have an unaspected Venus, but my Uranus conjuncts my ascendant, and I know a lot about Uranus. Okay. It's the courage to live who you were meant to be. Okay, so Uranus is going to try to take that sun energy and it's going to try to say, take it, and it's going to try to make it its own. It's going to try to make you become totally you. It's what Jung talked about, the individuation process, which we see over here, the process of authentic self discovery, the Jungian process of discovering who you were meant to be, who you are. It's highly individualistic expression, or it can be innovation. It can be iconoclastic to an extreme. It's generally the key word to think about it in my mind is someone who's an original. Okay, now you can be an original for good and fit in. You can be an original for bad and not fit in. Okay, you can be part of a biker gang. Okay, be the leader of a biking gang, and I'm not just saying the ones that are bikers and just enjoying their Harley Davidson. I'm talking about the ones who push drugs and sell drugs and do other kinds of weird things. But you get a reputation for being you. Okay, that could be that could be Uranus in a kind of a negative twist. The interesting thing about Uranus, just like Aquarius, Aquarius has two sides. Remember, traditionally Saturn rules both Capricorn and Uranus. So you'd be thinking like, what the heck could that possibly have? But in the Uranian Saturnian way, it's looking back in nostalgia. It's someone who longs for the former days when all was well. Okay. It can align with traditional structures. It's the halcyon days. Okay. Uh, Probably the most famous conservative that people know, and they either loved him or hated him, was Ronald Reagan. Okay. President of the United States, but he was one who used to hearken back to. And he was an example of Aquarius. So here's someone who I think represents. Now, I think I recommended his book to you, Liz. Okay.
Yes.
So this is an American actor and producer, and his breakthrough performance as a leading man came in a legal drama, A Time to Kill, in 1996. This is when he came on the map. In 2000s, his name, as you already know, is Matthew McConaughey. He became best known for starring in romantic comedies, establishing him as a sex symbol. Now, isn't it interesting that he has Uranus? It rules his MC and it's in the fifth house.
Yes.
Okay, so you'd get the idea of a unique performer, but can you also see why he became a sex symbol? Okay, because
Oh,
it rules the fifth house of all things. Okay. After he took a 2-year hiatus from film acting because he wanted to begin appearing in more dramatic roles. He was he they wanted during the time that he became his most famous through those romantic roles that he did. He didn't want to get stuck in them, but every role that came after that was a romantic role, so he turned them all down. And the interesting thing is he turned down money that was more money than all the money he made paid up to that point, because he wanted to do roles that he wanted to do, roles that he saw himself in. And so he took that hiatus. And what did he do? After that, he got the role for the Dallas Buyer Club, which earned him widespread praise, accolades, and an Academy Award for Best Actor. Okay. So he stuck to his guns and said, I don't know how this is going to turn out, but his manager was not happy with him turning down all these roles, because I would imagine the manager is going, hey, that's 5 or 10% commission that I'm not getting on all that big money they want to pay you. But he stuck to his guns, and now look what happened. Every role after that was a success. And of course, now he's always in the news for trying to be a reasonable person, but he always constantly reminds us that we need to be who we're meant to be. Okay. And for me, he is one of the ones, if you read his biography, and I think his biography was called Green Lights.
Mm.
And if you read that, you will see an unaspect Uranus unfolding through his life. You will see this chart lived out. It's a very good chart, a very good chart to look at for, like I was saying earlier, for going and studying a famous person. And there's enough dates and time in there where you can actually see it. It's a beautiful example of it and a really good chart. Highly recommended. Okay, I also have a good chart for Neptune. And we've seen this chart before in our midpoint pictures, because not only did he have a bunch of midpoints which were suggesting all the things that happened in his life, he had an unaspected Neptune. And an unaspected Neptune, as you can imagine, the person can live their life in sort of a poetic, dreamlike, or even mystical terms. There's usually a music or artistic outlet, or there could be a spiritual outlet. Neptune tends toward a dominant unaspected Neptune running away with the chart, excuse me. There's a lot of sensitivity, inspiration, dreams are important. One can learn how to creatively visualize. In other words, seeing the end result of something you want to make happen before it ever happens. It's like a film, a preview of a film before, but you do this for your life. Okay. It could lend itself toward idealism. Anything that Neptune touches, especially Venus or Mercury, can tend toward a vision where one sees the best that can possibly happen, the perfect way that it can happen. But as we know, in this life, we're never going to achieve perfection. So the idealism often becomes a defensive posture more so. And when it's a defensive posture, it winds up causing a problem between us and other people, because nobody can live up to that. Okay. It also could be a well-developed ascetic sense, faith, or religion. It could be the kind of person, just like Uranus, but in a different way. Uranus can identify with the underdog, but Neptune compassionately identifies it. A Neptune person could feel the pain of the underdog and therefore want to help out. It could be one who tirelessly works for the down and out. It could be someone who is an activist for homeless people, for example, or someone like that. They could have possibly an unaspected Neptune. It'd be a way that it could work out in a positive way for society. Or they could say, you know what? Forget this, man. I want a life of seclusion. Could be a person who runs away and becomes a nun or a priest. Okay. I don't want to do what is over here. I only want to work for God, whatever that their vision of God is. Okay. It could be solitude, could be privacy. They could have a fantastic fantasy life. It could be escape and delusion. And of course, if it is escape and delusion, people can escape and become deluded in many ways, but obviously drugs, anything taboo, I don't know, nowadays, mushrooms. Okay. All of these different things are various ways to escape, or to access this sort of Neptunian realm, this dream state. Okay. Normally you can't. Yeah. So the person we have is someone we've seen before. This is the chart of Cheech Marin. And as we said, okay, so look where it is. We see that we have both Venus and Neptune. So now when you're studying Venus unaspected, you have the chart of Katy Perry, but you also have the chart of Cheech Marin, because he also has an unaspected Venus, and that unaspected Venus rules his seventh house. And we know we have an unaspected Venus. And where is it at? It's in the 10th house. So this has to do with career and vocation and status and things that he wants to be known for. And it's ruling his 7th house. So it's somehow going to be brought out in the partnership with the public. Okay. And we have a Neptune, which is in Libra. So we get the Venus angle. It's disposed of by Venus, and Neptune rules the 5th house. And we know this is a good house for someone who wants to become a performer or an artist or film or an actor or something like that. Okay. And then we see that his moon is in the third house, which is again brings in the communication aspect of this. And so now we have the chart that we can see here of a potential actor and someone whose moon is in Capricorn, so going to work tirelessly and make sure that this thing happens. Okay. Okay. So as I said, he's an American stand-up comedian, actor, writer, activist, and art collector. Okay. Do all of those things sound like the unaspected planets we were just talking about, and or the houses we just mentioned being touched?
Yes.
Training need is to administrate progress. We know that. He first became recognized as part of the comedy act Cheech and Chong. In 1967, there was the beginning, I think, of the war on drugs, and there was the Vietnam thing going on. So he moved to Vancouver, British Columbia, in order to evade the draft. Okay, so this is one way that now you can look at this on different ways. I'm not putting a judgment, but this was evading a responsibility that he had in the country, that so he left the country. Okay, um, that's where he met, actually, interestingly enough, Tommy Chong, who became his partner and then became the duo. He became famous for his movies Up in Smoke, Cheech and Chong's next movie, and he did a record called Cheech and Chong. And much of the topic, in addition to the comedy, had to do with marijuana. Now, where would you put marijuana? Would that be under Neptune? Would we consider
Probably.
that? And the exaggeration of it, if you remember, whenever they did a movie, they used to have joints which were the size of, I don't know, gigantic sausage logs. Okay. They weren't these little logs, they were these gigantic things. And they did these to excess. The other thing was, think about it. He was also, in a way, getting the society ready for the fact that marijuana would eventually become legal. Okay, so through humor and through comedy and through seeing how that affected people, he got people to see another side of the marijuana picture. Okay. Um, the other thing, a fifth house, remember Neptune there? He wrote a bunch of children books. Okay, just an aside. He's also an avid collector of Chicano art. His extensive private collection, when I was researching this, he had over 700 unique pieces. And he took it, and rather than keeping it just for himself, he created the Cheech Marin Center for Chicano Art, Culture, and Industry in Riverside, California. And he donated his collection to that museum, so that he took what he was able to procure and put it out there so that everybody could enjoy it and so that people could understand the culture that he came from. So I like that, because I think Venus and Neptune is also a good expression for culture, because Venus has to do with socializing, Neptune has to do with this sort of bigger picture that you tap into, and I can just feel this representing that. So interesting chart, but you can look at this for Neptune and also for the Venus um, unaspected planet. Okay, we have one more. Okay, so this is a person. Oh, sorry, I'm ahead of myself. So unaspected Pluto is interesting because Pluto has to do really, if you look at it traditionally, even in the modern, it has to do with transformation. It has to go with going down into Hades. Something happens down there deep underneath, and then you come out almost as a new person. Well, if you think about it, Pluto has to do with feelings of personal power. Okay, because that's what it's about. And there's another thing which I'll talk about in a minute. The question is the feelings of personal power, are they strong, meaning that you feel secure in your power, or are they lacking and you feel insecure? And if you feel insecure, then why? Who made you feel insecure about your personal power? Who made you feel bad about your personhood? Who told you that you could never amount to something? Who put their foot on your neck when you were young, okay, and held you down, okay? So unaspected Pluto is also can be a drive to be influential, but in a massive way. Why? Pluto represents how far how intense, how, if it's water and down, how deep. Okay, if it's in the sky, it's way up there. Okay, so it has to do with excesses. It's also one of the keys. Pluto, you will often see in its various ways as being part of the piece that tells us that this person has potential prominence. Or if you go and see prominent people, you often see a Pluto thing going on there. It's, if it's a drive to be influential, then it can be, if you can't be famous yourself, you might want to associate with or control people who are in power and influence. Okay. So I want you to think of Pluto extremes. I want you to think pushing limits. And again, just like all of the outer planets, Uranus and Neptune, this can be people of influence that could be quote unquote on the positive or negative side. Okay. This could be things that you associate with. Well, we'll get that in a minute. But this is how far is too far, how much is too much, high highs and low lows. Because on a drug point of view, this could be bipolar. Okay. Someone with a prominent Pluto or Pluto routing in a way that is not quite there could be a chemical imbalance and suggest a bipolar situation, and it could be the highs and lows. It's that kind of extremes, but in other areas of life. Okay, it can associate strongly with taboo and fringe parts of society, fringe parts. Okay, now the danger with fringe parts and taboos is what used to be taboo and fringe can become normal and eventually no longer taboo and fringe. Okay. At one time, rap music was considered to be taboo and fringe. And now every commercial that you have has some sort of a, a music part of it in there, which is from a famous rap music song or something, as an example, because of the catchiness and that kind of thing. But when you hear the word Pluto and you hear the word transform, what I want you to think about is what transforms and changes you. Something happens up here in your mind. So think new perspectives leading to a feeling of empowerment, or new perspectives negatively leading to feelings of empowerment. Maybe you feel like nothing you ever is going to do is going to change. And so you're just going to say, I've had enough of that. And I'm going to become a part of the society that tries to break things down. Maybe that's how you choose to interact with that. So it's a powerful potential. Now, if you are not involved in an area of life that allows you to let this come out, you may just feel bad about yourself your whole life. It may not go very far, but you never can quite feel good about yourself because of the Pluto situation. And I think we have a good example of a chart. Now, most of you probably don't know who this is. So, this is a person who was born when her mother was 45 years old. Okay. She was raised thinking that she had a learning ability. Why? Because they misdiagnosed, and the person actually had Asperger's syndrome and an above IQ. Okay, her IQ was above average, but because they treated her as this learn with a learning disability, she was put in school in places where she got labeled, and people used to tease the heck out of her and make her feel bad about herself. Now, her Pluto is in the fourth house, but I can't see the degree. It may or may not be rushing in, and it rules her sixth house in this case. So the sixth house often has to do with the illnesses and things that happen to us. And notice how she's getting tagged with this syndrome that was misdiagnosed. Okay. She's now a Scottish singer. She rose to fame after appearing as a contestant on the third series of British Got Talent, singing I Dreamed a Dream from Les Miserables. She came on, and all of the judges sat there and looked at her and said, again, excuse me, do you know where you're at? Are you sure you mean to be here? Uh, are you sure you can sing? And then when she started to sing, she blew them away because she sang like an angel. She had an extremely powerful voice. Okay. Now, the interesting story was not just that. If I happened to watch that live and I got moved to tears when I watched that performance, and I felt like, how dare you judges do that? But the problem is, every now and then you get a buffoon that comes on and makes a fool of themselves. So they were afraid that that's what she was going to do because they judged her based on the way she looked. Okay. But she was far from that. Now, the interesting thing was her mother urged her to enter British Got Talent and take the risk of singing in front of an audience larger than her parish church. Because prior to that, the only audience she had was church members. Okay. Subsequently, her mother died. So her plans were almost abandoned after her mother died, but she decided that she had made that deal with her mother. And so she was motivated to seek a musical career to pay tribute to her mother. So her performance on the show was the first time she had sung in public since her mother died. Now, isn't it again Pluto? Okay, death issues, things that have to do with death. Neptune probably is probably the actual death, but Pluto has to do with death issues. It has to do with the empowerment that results of how you respond to death issues, your acceptance of death, those things that happen with death that were impressed upon you. Okay, um, and her album went on to sell, I forget, 1 million+ copies. She later had several other albums. I in fact gave her tribute and bought her album myself, which was great. She basically is kind of like an opera singer, okay, without having ever trained in opera. And in November 2014, which was obviously, I can't see this, is that 1961? So that's 39. So she was over 50 years and she finally had her first boyfriend. Okay. Um, and he was around the same age as her. So it's not always, you don't always get these fantastic looking people with these fantastic looking patterns. You get some really quirky people, but if they, imagine if her mother had not supported her singing, which her mother always did. Her mother always told her how fantastic her singing was. And oh, that's the other thing. Notice that her Pluto is on her north node. Okay. And the nodal axis when you're young and growing up represents your mother. Okay, or the influence your mother had. So isn't it interesting that the only reason she decided to do her Plutonian stuff was because her mother, and in her case, the memory of her mother, are the sole reasons why it guided her forward. Okay, so again, this is all how astrology works. Um, there's other stuff there, but again, I don't have the time to go through them, or else we would be here for another 2 hours, and that's not the deal we have for today. So, any questions or any thoughts or anything you picked up? Liz, tell me one point. Give me one thing that you learned today that you're going to take with you and use in your consultations.
Well, I'm going to start looking at the unaspected planets much more carefully than I have been. That's what I'm going to start doing because I myself have unaspected um, Uranus in my chart. So I want to do that. But fabulous, fabulous discussion today and sharing with everybody. I so appreciate that. And I think we have a summary that will, oh, in conclusion,
Yeah, just a quick little summary. Planets correlate with inherent human behavior. So rather than seeing the planet causing it, seeing the planet as the needs that are happening as a result of those planetary issues. If it's an unaspected planet, it seems to run wild through the chart. You can see their trail by following. We didn't really get into this too much, but the dispositor chain, but we did it a couple times. That's all that is that this planet is disposed of by this, ruled by this planet, and you go as far out as you can, and they just work that way. Noel said that this can easily become a person's mark of distinction. Okay, the unaspected planet. It will deepen your chart analysis and enrich your client discussion. So please don't ignore them. And as Liz said, she's not going to ignore them anymore. And I hope the rest of you, whether you're listening today or you're listening in the future, please, please, I beg you, okay, take notice of them when you're analyzing the chart.
They seem to be very, very powerful and explain a lot about people without even looking at anything else in their charts. I mean, because
That's
it
the point. You can get so much just from that.
well, I wanna thank you again for joining us today and donating your time to us, and I wanna thank all those that watched live. We enjoy your support and thank those that come back and watch at a future time. And to get a hold of John, his website is astroperegrine.com, and he's gonna give you a brief description of his software that he created.
Okay, so two things. If you have any questions at all, just send me an email at info@astroperegrine.com. Okay. Um, I am also the author of a software that works on Mac or Windows. And one of the easiest softwares you probably are going to learn how to use. It does, for the average astrologer, it will do everything they ever need to do in their entire astrology career. It does it in a very practical Capricornian way. So, and it's very pretty to look at. So that's that. If you want more information about it, go to astroperegrine.com. If you want lessons, we have a course and we do the lessons one-on-one, and you can go to jmastro.com/private dash classes. Excuse me. And if you want a demo of how any of the software works, I'd be very happy to spend an hour with you. And you can go to the site, and then there'll be a book it button, or you can go to directly to this demo. And actually, now that I'm looking at the demo, that's actually a buy now button. So if you're interested in buying, you can go right to that buy now button. And also, if you do buy as a result of seeing this on Liz's channel, there's a discount coupon there. So if you get the core, which you'll get a 12% discount. And if you buy the bundle, which is the core plus the astrocartography module, then you can get 20% off. Okay, that's
And
it.
I attest that it is very user friendly, and I've used it on my PC, and now I've transitioned it to my Mac, and I agree 100% user friendly. And I have other shows, a variety that you can go back and watch, and always something coming up new each week, 1 to 3 shows a week, so I look forward to having you join me another day, and John, I wanna thank you again. This was fabulous and fantastic, and I look forward to having you on the show again, and we're gonna say goodbye for now and see y'all next time.